The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
We would like to set a new standard by using the method that was used on the casino as a standard operating procedure for the city. And candidly, Steve Leeper here, who is from 3CDC, and I'm happy that he's here, 3CDC has better inclusion numbers than the city does, by a lot.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. Improving the inclusion performance of the city of Cincinnati with its huge contracting needs and capacity has been a wish of many mayors and politicians. Just about a year ago, Mayor Cranley not only stated his intent to achieve that goal, but he took concrete steps to make it happen. That included the appointment of a 70-member Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee. The mayor also hired Janet Reed and Vincent Brown, two seasoned consultants who have worked with hundreds of private sector companies to improve their inclusion policies and performance. At the end of January of this year, Reed and Brown delivered a final report entitled Imagine a Greater Cincinnati for Economic Inclusion. Not letting the report gather any dust, City Manager Harry Black immediately appointed Thomas Corey to implement Cincinnati's economic inclusion efforts. My guest this morning is Thomas Corey, the new Executive Economic Inclusion Project Director. Mr. Corey is an attorney by background. Before accepting this position, he was the Chief Solicitor with the Law Department of the City of Baltimore, Maryland. In that role, he was responsible for overseeing the legal and administrative functions of the Minority and Women's Business Opportunity Office. Tom, welcome to Cincinnati. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you, Dan. How are
you?
And
you're just falling right into our balmy weather here, and you're loving this as a welcome.
Somebody should have told me it was going to be a minus 6 degrees the other day.
Well, yeah, we won't tell you what else is coming. Wait till the summer. No, well, actually, Baltimore can be just as hot and humid.
It can, and just as cold.
Yeah. Well, you know, you have an advantage. I think it's an advantage to be coming in from the outside. You arrive in Cincinnati. You have a perspective. You're not just somebody who's been here your whole life. How would you evaluate where we are in our region on this question of economic inclusiveness compared to other places, compared to Baltimore, compared to the field as you understand it?
Well, I guess this comment will not be very kind. When I look at the numbers that I've seen thus far, the preliminary numbers, we're looking at pretty much 1960s numbers. And so you're well behind a lot of jurisdictions. Baltimore does quite well with MBE and WBE inclusion.
Minority business enterprise.
Minority business enterprise and women business enterprise. It does quite well. And so does a lot of other jurisdictions that I've looked at. So Cincinnati has a way to go to get where those jurisdictions are. And it can get there, but it's not going to be without a lot of bumps along the road.
The whole question here is, why is this important to a community? Because you could measure how we do business in a variety of ways. You could measure it in terms of, do we let contracts and get jobs done as inexpensively as possible? Do we get it? Are we customer friendly? Are we efficient? There's a lot of ways to measure, but why is economic inclusiveness an important measure?
One, you're not really efficient when you don't have all segments of your community involved in your procurement process. If you want to impact your unemployment rate, you want to make sure that everybody is in a position to live a sustainable lifestyle, you got to have them involved in your procurement process. And the city has a role to play in that. And if it finds that there's some way that certain segments of the community aren't participating, it has to look at itself and say, are we contributing to that problem? And if so, then we need to do something about it, because all of the taxpayers within your jurisdiction should have an opportunity to participate in your program. And that will make a healthy economy. When you only have a certain segment of it thriving, you don't have a healthy economy. That's the way I see it.
And are a healthy society.
All
I mean,
right.
those two things are so closely linked to each
Yes.
other. If you had to point to a community that you thought did a really good job at this, it could be Baltimore, I don't know. I also think of Atlanta, and maybe they do a really good job, or maybe they tell a really good story, or maybe both, I'm not sure. Who do you think of as a model that's important out there?
I think Baltimore is. And I think Atlanta set the tone when Mayor Jackson set the tone with the Hartsfield Airport. I think he set the tone for all these programs going forward. But I look at Baltimore, and I point out Baltimore not just because I'm there. I point it out because the program was successful, because all of the elected officials were so firmly behind the program. So that allows a program to work. You can have a beautifully written ordinance, but if you don't have your chief executive officer and that's in charge of your city behind you, the programs won't work. And Baltimore has done, I think, an exceptionally good job. And it's not just me saying it because I was there, but just look at the numbers. It has done quite well. And Maryland, and also Maryland, the state of Maryland, has done an excellent job.
Is your impression in this field of inclusion, economic inclusion, that a lot of private businesses, and we have some big businesses in Cincinnati, a P&G, a Kroger's, a lot of the healthcare, which is these healthcare systems, which are buying huge amounts of product. Are they ahead of the public bodies in terms of getting inclusion integrated into what they do and the results of what the economic life of their companies, the private companies?
Some of them are, because some of them have a program in place to get folks into their supplier chain, which is very important, because once you're in that sort of chain, you're able to sustain yourself, because you keep getting business over and over again. And some are behind the times. They're not doing a good job of including everybody and getting folks in their supplier chain. So we can look at some examples, I guess, but in some jurisdictions like this one, I'd say some of the companies are certainly ahead of the city of Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think of P&G, I think of Mercy Health, Cintas, places that I know have really got proactive programs. They're not just sitting around and waiting and hoping that something happens. In fact, that's part of the theme of the report was the city has to be proactive. It's not just issuing a bid package and seeing what happens.
No, that's not going to work. We have to be proactive.
And what does proactive mean?
Proactive means, one, we make sure that every contract that comes out of the city, that's put out for bid, has minority and women business participation. And that it's just not numbers on a paper. That is, when you submit your bid and you don't commit to achieve the goals on that contract, we need to toss that bid out. And we need to go either to the next bidder or bid the whole project again.
Now, is this a case of ownership of the companies that are bidding, or is it employees that will be on the job, or is it both?
No, we're looking at businesses getting the work as subcontractors with these prime contractors. That's what this program is all about. And if the subcontractors are able to get work, then they will, as they grow, hire more people. So it's not an employment program per se. It has an impact on employment. As the smaller companies are able to get work and to grow, you'll see that they'll start hiring more people, and you'll see a lot more happier faces.
Given the way you describe that as part of the bidding process, it's baked into the process.
It's baked in.
How is that different from set-asides, which are problematic from a legal point of view?
Set-asides are you're just saying these contracts are reserved just for a particular group, and of course the Supreme Court has said that they're taboo. The way that it works, and it works within the legal framework of constitutional scrutiny, is that you base your participation on contract by contract availability. You look and see who's out there that's ready, willing, and able to do the work, and then you assign goals based on those numbers. And that the court smiles on that sort of thing. Set-asides and quotas are strictly taboo. I mean, that was a problem that Baltimore had early on in 1998, 1999, or something like that. We actually had a quota-like system, and the court struck it down. So we want to have it baked in, but we want to have it so that it is a defensible system.
Is part of this breaking contract bid packages down into sizes where it's not just the great big companies that can bid?
Yes, yes, that's an important part of it. It's called unbundling in the term. Is getting it to manageable sizes so that the smaller companies can participate. That's going to be an important part. And then going a little bit farther than that is also the city has to unbundle certain contracts so that folks, minorities and women-owned businesses can participate as primes. For instance, you may have $1 million contract, you look at it and say, well, wait a minute, we can break it up in 4 pieces, and that gives everybody a fair opportunity to compete for a $250,000 size contract. And those are some of the things we'll be looking at as well.
Is there also a portion of this, and I'm aware of this was a private entity, but when the Freedom Center was built, National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, they actually, in a proactive way, also helped companies get bonded, certified, make sure that people who could do the work were in a position to bid. Is that also part of what needs to happen?
That needs to happen. We need to find ways to help folks get across the bonding hurdle, because that's a big impediment to some companies. And the city, one of the things it can do, it can look at some contracts where bonding is really not necessary. That is, we could waive bonding on a particular contract or lower the bonding standards to get them in there, because there are contracts, and we did this in Baltimore. We looked around and said, well, we don't need bonding on this. We can just take the bonding out, and then that opened up to a lot of folks.
I think a question comes from some people who are hearing this. Is this going to drive up the cost of doing business for the city?
I don't think so. I think the more people in the game, the better prices the city will get. They're competitive. You need competition. Competition usually brings you better prices. So I don't think it's going to drive it up. That's just a myth that some people put out there in order to scare jurisdictions away for minority business programs, I think.
And are there studies out there that have the data?
Data that says that doesn't necessarily drive it up. Now, you can always find instances where there are some higher costs, but by and large, it's better for your local economy if everybody's participating.
Now, you've only been here a couple of weeks. Just getting oriented, what do you think is your biggest challenge?
My biggest challenge right now is that the mayor and the city manager put us out there and say, this is what we're going to do. And we're going to do it. But we have to manage the expectations. All of these things that need to be done can't be done overnight. It's going to take time. We have to put systems and processes in place in order to get where we want to go. But it's not an overnight thing. It's not an overnight thing in any jurisdiction that you look at. But it is a consistency. You do the same thing over again and apply the same standards, the same rules on every contract, and you'll see that we'll get there. You'll see that the numbers will rise. You'll also see that once everyone understands that there are opportunities in the city of Cincinnati, you'll start seeing people flock to the city in terms of businesses, minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses that see an opportunity to grow their company. So we're hopeful that'll happen, but it's not an overnight thing. So expectations is what I see right now is the challenge, is keeping that managed up.
Some of what I think you're talking about there is changing the culture And culture takes a time.
Culture takes
time to change.
It takes time. Culture within the private sector and culture within the city sector as well.
So, in timeline sense, the last area I want to talk about, say a year from now, how would you, when I have you back, and I'll have you back multiple times, a year from now, what should we be looking for? And maybe 5 years from now, what should we be looking for?
A year from now, you should see that we have a program up and running that will include minority and women-owned businesses. We're also working on putting in place where there will be a program where people just based in the city of Cincinnati will have a greater opportunity to compete for contracts just among themselves. And that will be a race and gender neutral activity.
So it's local residents, citizens,
and that's we have to get the confidence of the local folks back with the city of Cincinnati, and so that would be one of the things. And then a year from now, you ought to see all those numbers rise. You should also see starting more dollars going toward these smaller companies, and it won't be big dollars in the first year, but in 5 years, you should see a big difference.
Well,
a big difference.
I promise you, you will be back. We'll track this. This is a very important initiative.
It is.
And welcome to Cincinnati, and
thank you very much
for being here. Stay tuned. After the break, for 100 years, the Women's City Club has been lighting fires and leading the way in Cincinnati. Join me to meet the president and the author of a new book on those efforts. Welcome back. The fact that the Women's City Club is celebrating its centennial this year is exceptional. First, as Robert Putnam has documented in his essential book, Bowling Alone, changes in American society in the last 35 years have wiped out the vast majority of formal civic associations of any kind. Second, the survival of a women's association that spans a century of literally revolutionary change in the consciousness and role of women in society makes the survival of a voluntary organization that wants to have a cutting edge astounding. On Friday evening, the members and friends of the Women's City Club will gather to celebrate this milestone. This morning, I am joined by Susan Noonan, the current president of the Women's City Club, and Rachel Powell, the author of a new book called Lighting the Fire, Leading the Way, which explores the history of the Women's City Club from 1965 to 2015. Welcome to Newsmakers, and congratulations on the centennial. It is a rare thing that any organization.
It is a rare thing.
How would you describe the Women's City Club today, and how is it related to the beginning? Do you think there's continuity? Is there more continuity or more discontinuity?
I think that the women of the club from the very beginning have all had the same goal in mind, and that is to do whatever we can do to make things better in our community. We look at an issue, we research an issue, and then we take action. We don't just sit back. But the thing that keeps us relevant today and in the future is that we continue to reevaluate ourselves constantly, looking at, okay, where are we in relationship to the community? Where are we in relationship to the people we serve? And we talk about things that are happening today, things that are on people's mind, like youth off the streets in Cincinnati, so we can get them before they get in trouble. We talk about mental health issues. We talk about anything that has to do with the city government. We're very active in sort of keeping an eye.
Always been
an
involved.
Eye on city government. We were actually, when we started, we were set up to coordinate with every city department.
Right.
And as you know, the Women's City Club started the Planning Commission. We started the Better Housing League. We started Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Association. Right. Women Helping Women, and many other organizations were really begun thanks to the action of women in our club. So we will continue to move ahead with the times and never get stagnant.
Rachel, in my intro, I was referencing the fact that the club's history spans this century of change in women's positions. Founded in 1915, just a few years later, the 19th Amendment brings the vote to women. But then what you really get into is the impact of the women's liberation, not just feminism, but women's liberation movement in the 70s and 80s particularly. What is it that you think? How have those things changed? Susan was talking about continuity. What about change?
Well, I think that in particular, the feminist movement in the 1970s and 1980s changed the way that the club approached certain issues. So prior to that, in its early history, the club members, were often wives of prominent members of the Cincinnati community. And they had access to the Cincinnati community then through their husbands. And in the 1960s and 1970s, as the women's liberation movement really took off, there was all of a sudden this reevaluation of, well, what are some different ways that we can take action? And so the women and the Women's City Club were then able to start looking at issues and taking action on their own terms. And I think longtime member Louise Spiegel explains it so eloquently, and I talk about it in the book about how, women in the Women's Club went from pillow talk with their husbands in terms of making change to then going out and really doing the work and themselves and educating the community and empowering women in the community to take action.
One of the things about reading the book, which will come out this Friday, it's
Yes.
not even available. We don't have a copy of it.
At the dinner.
I was, you sent me a copy of the manuscript. One of the things is the incredibly vast array of issues that the Women's City Club has been involved with in one way or another. And race has always been, racial relations have always been one of those issues. And one of the images that you use is an image of Nikki Giovanni, who you brought here, who of course grew up in Cincinnati, came back, and the headline, as you see, Women's City Club is going to take a new direction on this issue and really about lots of things. It has bigger implications. But
Absolutely.
the question of race, what about white women, African American women in the club and being active?
Well, let me tell you, in 1927, Women's City Club started their first Race Relations Committee. 1927, before many people were even talking about it. 1952, we actually started the Mayor's Friendly Relations Commission, which is now the Human Relations Commission. We brought women into our club, I think, long before many other organizations in Cincinnati even considered it. Marion Spencer, Barbara Milan, there were a lot of African-American women that came in. Marion became president, as did Barbara Milan. And Barbara just emailed us a wonderful article about when she was president and was here for the 75th anniversary. But we have continued to do whatever we can to improve race relations. Equality, social justice is one of our goals, and certainly one of the things that we continually strive to do.
I want to bring Rachel back into this because, yes, that's all true, but it hasn't all been easy.
No.
A lot of
Right.
It hasn't been
internal
easy.
strife in terms of women of color and white women having different interests and different goals.
Definitely, and I think that relates even more to the broader feminist movement. Because at its core, feminism is about the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. However, equality means different things for different groups of women. And sometimes achieving that equality is more difficult for certain groups of women due to this intersection of class, gender, and race. And I think the Women's City Club did a fantastic job, and the fact that they went so far out of their comfort zone to try to diversify their membership speaks to how dedicated they were to really listening to the women of color that they wanted to join. But you're right, it was difficult because oftentimes what the Women's City Club was focusing on didn't necessarily coincide with what women of color in the community were really focused on and the changes that they were looking for in their community.
I've only got about a minute left, so I want to point out that the issues keep evolving, and
They do.
there's an image called about sustainability, leading the nation, LEEDing, and we'll bring that up. But what's the club been involved with in a practical way in terms of bringing that to the consciousness of this community?
Cincinnati Public Schools, we were founding members of the committee that worked with Cincinnati Public Schools to make all of that, when we had the new building project, all of the new schools LEED certified. And after that happened, the state then thought, okay, we're going to do what Cincinnati Women's City Club did, and the state has now taken on that same for that same charge to make schools LEED certified.
Well, I'm out of time. I congratulate you, but I want to also point out that at 1 o'clock on tomorrow, Monday, there will be WVXU. We will be doing a half hour on this as well, and I'll get to join you again. So congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much.
As an author, I know what goes into that. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Now that the Hamilton County Commission has rejected the proposal to build a new crime lab at the old Mount Airy Hospital, where do we go from here? That's next week. Have a good week.